So as we turn to the presentation portion of our meeting, I'm really happy to introduce Dr. Alan Weakley, our first speaker for January 2022. Dr. Weakley is a plant taxonomist, community ecologist, and conservationist specializing in the Southeastern United States. He holds a BA from UNC Chapel Hill and a PhD from Duke University. He's currently director of the UNC Herbarium, Department of the North Carolina Botanical Garden, and teaches as adjunct faculty at UNC Chapel Hill at the Highlands Biological Station. His contributions to plant conservation include work as a botanist and ecologist for the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program, as regional and chief ecologist for the Nature Conservancy and NatureServe, and in numerous publications on Flora of the Southeastern projects to make science more accessible to the masses. He has worked cooperatively with most federal and state land managing agencies in the southeastern U.S. Without further ado, speaking to us about the flora of the southeastern United States, conservation riches, challenges, and tools, let's welcome Dr. Alan Weakley. I give you the floor. Let's see, we need to unmute you.
Yeah.
Okay, can everybody see my opening slide all right?
Got it. Yep, thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you, Patricia. It's great to be here. I feel very honored to be able to present to this great group of folks. And I'm going to try to cover a lot today about the flora of the southeastern U.S., conservation riches, challenges, and tools. I wanted to be clear from the beginning that I treat the Southeast in a pretty broad sense, a biogeographic sense, which is essentially everything south of the glacial boundary and everything east of what sometimes gets called the dry line, roughly the 100th meridian, and all. But the parts of the Southeast, I've rounded out the boundary a little bit and included some glaciated areas for kind of convenience of dealing with things. So the topics I want to really cover today talk about Southeastern plant biodiversity, the rich and dynamic biodiversity that the Southeast is, and explore just a little bit about why that is and what implications that has for the long-term conservation of biodiversity here. Talk a little bit about the mismatch between that high biodiversity and kind of low conservation status across the region. But then really go into, in detail, some information tools that we're developing, me and my team at the North Carolina Botanical Garden for finding biodiversity, for doing biodiversity inventory, and information tools for managing biodiversity on public and private lands across the Southeast region. So if we look at maps of plant species diversity in the lower 48 states, this was developed by the Biota of North America program. You can see these darker green and particularly the blue areas of high biodiversity, obviously some out in California, and then a lot also in the southeastern United States. If we jump up to plant family diversity at a different taxonomic rank, the richness of the southeastern United States becomes even more apparent, and that is related to basically that the Southeast has been able to hold on to old lineages, old biodiversity lineages for longer because of its lack of glaciation and its humidity and other factors. And I'll talk about that a little bit further. And if we look at tree diversity, who knew? It's really Alabama, not the Great Smoky Mountains, that is tops and trees. The Red Hills of Alabama is where it's at. And not to be too plantist, I did also want to mention that the Southeast is, of course, rich in other kinds of biodiversity, cave flora and fauna, amphibian diversity and endemism, reptile diversity, fish diversity, freshwater mussels, the list goes on. And when we sort of stack up all these layers as NatureServe has done, and look at the map of biodiversity importance, this version for imperiled vascular plants, we see a similar pattern to that of the basic richness, with California and other parts of the West having high spots, and then a lot of biodiversity also across the southern Appalachians and the southeastern coastal plain, the Ozark and Ouachita Mountains, Edwards Plateau, etc. So the biodiversity richness of the Southeast is sometimes surprising to people who think of the Southeast as being sort of, well, boring looking, really, you know, forested and yeah, there's a lot of trees, but there's not much growing on the ground layer, and I think a lot of people's kind of representative view of the Southeast is something like this picture. But what we forget about is that the Southeast also has a tremendous diversity of specialized small patch and large patch communities that are embedded in that forest, and we'll talk a little further also about that forest and whether it's really all forest. But on this slide showing Cumberland rock houses on the upper left, longleaf pine fire maintained system in the upper right, a granite flat rock in Georgia, a specialized granite glade kind of community on the lower left, and high elevation rocky summits and spruce fir forests in the southern Appalachian Mountains. And so we can kind of describe this biodiversity in terms of the old earth, air, fire, water paradigm that has created this diversity. But we also have to roll in the crazy clock of time that we often have a hard time thinking about, but is really a critical component in the development of and the maintenance of biodiversity wherever it occurs. So the Eastern North America and the Southeast has a lot of physiographic diversity from the coastal plain, Piedmont, metamorphic rock, Blue Ridge, sedimentary rocks, plateaus and ridge and valley, etc. It has tremendous geologic diversity. This map showing the diversity in Alabama. While Eastern North America and the Southeast doesn't have the elevational and implied climate diversity of the West, there is mountain ranges from 6,684 feet high to sea level to add climatic diversity. And we also have a landscape with tremendous impacts of fire and variable impacts of fire. And so here you see a modeling of mean fire interval with nearly the entire Southeast, except for the higher elevations of the Appalachian Mountains, having quite frequent fire in the more fire-exposed portions of the landscape. Doesn't mean fire burns everywhere. It does mean actually that in areas where there is a lot of fire, that there is also a lot of fire diversity on the landscape compartments of where fire gets to and how frequently it burns and with what kind of impacts, or whether catastrophic or maintenance kind of fires. And then the time aspect, we can't forget that only 20,000 years ago, at the peak of the ice ages, the broad vegetation zones across most of North America were quite different than they are now, and this has lasting impacts on what we see on the landscape today. Easy to forget about those impacts, but they are very important and critical. And so this gives us kind of a crazy quilt of diversity, all of these different layers of edaphic diversity, fire diversity, climate diversity overlaid over one another, such that any given spot on the landscape has almost a unique combination of factors that have affected it. So when we look at time, I want to emphasize that things have not been static. And this is my little hand-drawn map of sort of biodiversity hotspots in the southeastern United States, with red and orange being high levels of endemism and resilience, and yellows in increasingly pale shades being also centers, but not as rich as the orange and red ones at all. And I want you to envision that during the Pleistocene ice ages, cold and moist conditions moved south, pushed south, animal and plant species moved with them. And so we had many things that we might think of as Arctic occurring in the southeast at the height of glaciation. But at other times, including in recent history, the climatic optimum or hypsothermal period, we had warm and dry conditions pushing in from the west, and animals and plants adapted to those kind of conditions moving into the southeast. And then at other times, we've also had hotter and wetter or seasonally dry conditions moving up from the West Indies and from Mexico into the southeastern United States. And each of the times over the last, not just 100,000 years, but millions of years, tens of millions of years that this has happened, it has brought new biodiversity into the region, which then when conditions changed back or changed, did all that biodiversity run back north or run back west or run back south? No, it got scraped off in places in the landscape that were suitable for it to maintain itself. And so currently we have spruce fir forests at the highest elevations of the Southern Appalachians, which might seem like a northern kind of thing that shouldn't be in the southeast at all. And we have prairie-like conditions on southwest-facing ridges and things like that, with grasses from the Great Plains that we also might think are kind of extrinsic to the region. Those organisms, once they get left behind, as it were, in the southeast region, do they stay static? No, they evolve. They're isolated from their buddies. They're breeding among themselves. They're responding to different conditions and so forth. So oftentimes we then have speciation, and therefore the generation of endemism, endemic species, new species, and so forth. So this adds to and enriches the biodiversity of our region. And I'm going to talk about just a couple of communities to sort of give you a little bit of a feel for that. So Serpentine Barrens. We have Serpentine Barrens in the southeastern United States. And the picture here is of a Serpentine Barren at about 3,400 feet elevation in the southern Blue Ridge of North Carolina. This kind of site would normally support a cove forest with rhododendrons or trilliums, or an oak forest, etc. But instead, we have this prairie-like grassland. And at this site, we have disjunct occurrences of things like Deschampsia cespitosa. So this tiny little yellow blip, if you can see my cursor here in southwestern North Carolina. Elymus trachycaulus, a widespread western and northern species, but here it is in the southern Appalachians. Sporobolus heterolepis, more of a midwestern species, disjunct at this site. Eulenbergia glomerata, more of a northeastern species, disjunct there. Poa salchuensis, also northeastern. And Gentianopsis crinita. But also species that are found only in the southeastern United States, such as Parnassia grandifolia, with this odd disjunct scattered distribution, which is currently under study and may actually be of multiple species. Symphyiotricum depauperatum at a Serpentine Barren in north central North Carolina, and the famous Serpentine Barrens in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Agellinus decimloba, currently under study for federal ENT listing related to some taxonomic changes that have been made. Echinacea levigata from Pennsylvania down to South Carolina and Georgia. And at the Buck Creek Serpentine Barren in southwestern North Carolina, we have an increasing list of narrow endemic, single site endemic species, the first of which that was named was Symphyiotricum rhiannon, an aster species that occurs only at that single site. A second single site endemic was named a number of years later, Pachyra serpenticola, and we are currently working on 3, 4, and 5, the third, fourth, and fifth endemic species for this site, including a species of Hexastylus wild ginger or heartleaf that also appears to be a single site endemic and has numerous distinctive morphological features as well as distinctive genetics. So when we look overall at these serpentine barrens in the southeastern United States, we see a sort of mix of unspeciated disjuncts, but also newly derived endemics from mainly Western North American and Northern circumboreal lineages, but also some Eastern North American kind of resident lineages, and many taxa of kind of Great Plainsian or even Western North American affinity C4 grasses and so forth. Another quick example that I won't go into in as much depth is wet pine savannas of the New Jersey Pine Barrens, coastal Carolina, and the Florida Panhandle, the Apalachicola National Forest area. And this seems like a sort of odd and miscellaneous sort of set of places. So we have Venus flytrap endemic to the coastal plain of the Carolinas. We have Lothiola occurring in the Carolinas, but also the New Jersey Pine Barrens, the Gulf Coastal Plain, and southern Nova Scotia. Harperocalis endemic to the Florida Panhandle, with its closest relatives in northern South America. Plea in the coastal plain of North Carolina and South Carolina, and then the Florida Panhandle. Gentiana autumnalis in the New Jersey Pine Barrens and North and South Carolina coastal plain, with its closest related sister species, Gentiana pinelliana, in the Florida Panhandle. And then, once again, to not be totally plantist, Hyla andersonii, the Pine Barrens tree frog, has a distribution in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, coastal plain of North and South Carolina, and Florida Panhandle and adjacent Alabama. What the hell is going on when these different organism groups all show a similar disjunction pattern? This is telling us something important about biodiversity through time, relictual areas, areas of endemism, areas of resiliency that have been able to maintain biodiversity through past climate changes. And I think it behooves us to pay attention to these sorts of patterns because it helps us also understand how we might maintain biodiversity through an unprecedented current climate change that we're embarked on. So coastal plain refugia with the blue stars, I've sort of marked where many of them are, and you can see the pattern of New Jersey, coastal Carolina, and the Florida Panhandle. These refugia may have been on what is now continental shelf, but the plants and animals were able to migrate inland as sea level rose at the end of the Pleistocene. So this second example, the wet pine savannas, we see a different pattern, but similar in its broad picture, but a different pattern of the specifics of different lineages of plants and animals sort of having combined and creating a kind of surprisingly diverse mishmash of different kind of origins, biogeographic origins that have maintained themselves at these kinds of sites. So if we turn to other southeastern communities that are centers of diversity, we can list them off. I put et cetera at the end of this. Many different types of specialized communities that maintain a lot of biodiversity currently, that have maintained that resiliently through past climate changes and more recent anthropogenic changes. And I'll draw your attention that this list includes many habitats that are not dense forests, and I'm going to come back around to that in a bit. And so I mentioned the idea that these areas of endemism and relictual biodiversity disjunction and so forth may tell us something important. And some of us on this call, I certainly am, are of an age that we get our retirement funds, our mutual funds, and so forth, and it always says past performance is not an indicator of future results. I just want to suggest that, except in biodiversity conservation, maybe past performance is an indicator of future results. These particular places on the landscape, because of climatic regimes and so forth, have proved to be resilient in the past, and they can likely prove to be resilient in the future. So they're good places to focus our conservation efforts. Okay, I'm going to turn to a somewhat different subject, and that is, what we know about biodiversity and what we don't know. And what we don't know is a lot. If we look at the vascular plant species of the Southeastern United States, the total number of native species is about 6,000. And about 1 in 10 of those, 600 species, have been named since 1960 or are in the process of being named. And most of those newly named species are narrowly endemic species. They're species that have, in the NatureServe ranking system, G1, G2, or G3 ranks. They're highly imperiled, therefore, and because of that, they tend to have a large influence on conservation priorities, with them being more likely to receive federal listing or state listing, to be the focus of site prioritization, et cetera, and to be prioritized for ex situ conservation efforts. So perhaps as much as 50% of the G1, G3 taxa in the Southeastern United States have been named in the last 50 years. That means that at the beginning of the era of the heritage programs in the 1970s, many of these species weren't on anybody's radar. They weren't being tracked because they hadn't even been named. And therefore, the ongoing process of biodiversity inventory is a critical one for providing the foundation for our conservation planning, conservation action, conservation restoration on federal and state and private lands. The process of naming new species is not slacking off. In fact, it seems to be increasing. At least in the Southeastern United States. I haven't done the analysis in other areas, but species are being named at what seems like an increasing rate as we focus more on these specialized habitats. We apply some new techniques like DNA sequencing and so forth to help us make taxonomic decisions. So just a few examples of new species being named: Marshallia legrandii. Derek Poindexter and I named this almost 10 years ago now, based on morphological data. It later has been validated with genetic data as well. This species occurs and is extant at only 2 remaining sites, both of which have some protection. The presence of this species has leveraged conservation action at both of these sites through state acquisition of lands, private acquisition of lands, then being donated for conservation value, and so forth. So the taxonomy translates directly to conservation action. Another example in Marshallia is Marshallia pulchra, the beautiful Barbara's buttons. Wes Knapp, who I saw on this call, Derek and I worked on this one. We discovered that there had been essentially a species which was already quite rare was really 2 species, and the more widespread but still rare species needed a new name, which we gave it Marshallia pulchra. That left Marshallia grandiflora as a apparently extinct species, only not having been seen in over 100 years from just a couple of sites in Western North Carolina. So this is the distribution of those three Marshallia species, Legrandii, grandiflora, and pulchra, all being of conservation concern. So when we look just at the last 24 months, we've had 25 new species named in the southeastern United States. I have flagged their GRanks, most of them being G1, G2, G3, and also their habitats, the yellow highlighted habitats being open, grassy, grassland, or sun-loving kinds of habitats. All of this has led to the southeastern United States being noticed as a biodiversity hotspot, and Reed Noss and colleagues in 2014 designated the southeastern coastal plain as the 34th global biodiversity hotspot, joining these areas. So North America not well represented with these hotspots. You may notice and be surprised by the fact that the North Carolina coastal plain comes out as a biodiversity hotspot, and for instance, the Amazon basin doesn't. And the reason for this is slightly perverse, and that is that the hotspot designation relies on high unique biodiversity, but also very high threat to that biodiversity. And although we read in the newspapers about the threats to the Amazon, the threats and level of conversion of biodiversity lands in the southeastern United States, and specifically the coastal plain, has been even greater, with 85% of all habitats in the southeastern coastal plain having been converted to intensive human uses or highly altered, and the grassland and savanna woodland habitats at over 95% of conversion and alteration. So very high biodiversity, but very high threats to that biodiversity. And an analysis by Clinton Jenkins at Duke University also suggested that not only is the Southeast and California and Oregon, as shown on this map, very high in basic biodiversity, but also high in the mismatch of U.S. protected lands with biodiversity. So you can see these red and orange and bright yellow areas clustered in the Southeast, and a few other areas. California looks like the Davis Mountains in Texas and the Florida Keys, showing a high mismatch of protected land to where biodiversity is. So lots of folks on the call from Western U.S. In the Southeast, we have some level of jealousy about the amount of federal and state land with opportunity for conservation on public lands that is present in many other parts of the country, less so in the Southeast, though we do have, of course, important Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, etc., lands in the Southeast that conserve biodiversity. So I want to turn to my third major subject, and that is Flora's plant guides, apps, and websites. New species get named. They get published in obscure journals, thousands of papers, etc. And it's really floras that, for plants, synthesize the information on biodiversity and make it accessible to a wide range of folks who need this information and all. So the southeastern U.S. has had relatively poor coverage of floras. Lots of states have never had a state flora. I'm looking at you, Alabama and Mississippi, for instance. And there's been a tendency in the Southeast for us to have to use old floras with very out-of-date taxonomy and information. So the Radford Allison Bell Flora, the Manual of the Vascular Plants of the Carolinas, got used way outside the Carolinas and was published now 54 years ago. And so 54 years of taxonomic change means that it doesn't contain many of those newly described species. as well as the name changes and splits and lumps and so forth. And I also want to suggest that in 2022, we have new generations of field biologists and botanists who have different expectations of what a flora ought to look like, and different approaches to how information should be available. We also have, as has been much publicized, a growing problem of, one might call it, plant blindness. There's been less education in botany and natural history than there used to be. There's less funding from funders like the National Science Foundation for natural history. Universities have tended to turn towards medical biology and the very rich funding available for that. And maybe we all have also physics envy, or famous physicist Enrico Fermi. He said, if I could remember the names of all these particles, I would have been a botanist. So maybe physicists have botany envy. But we have a challenge in training a new generation of botanists and getting those botany geeks and nerds and knowledgeable people out there who might want to wear this T-shirt. I think a lot of us on this call can probably relate. Speaking of plant blindness, this picture of me when I was 5 reveals a certain amount of plant blindness by my parents, who actually did know quite a bit about plants, but many of you may recognize the flower that I'm playing as a trumpet as Jimson weed, datura, a famously toxic and hallucinogenic plant. And maybe I shouldn't have been putting it in my mouth and playing it like a trumpet. But these old floras, these big tomes that we put together once every half century, maybe in 2022 we can do better. So I and the team of folks that I'm working with have been trying to reinvent the flora as a 21st century tool for biodiversity inventory. Biodiversity inventory is basic and foundational. We need to reach out to a broader set of people to do that inventory and just to care about the conservation of biodiversity. So back about almost a decade ago now, we published the Flora of Virginia, and John Clayton came back from the dead carrying his copy of the previous Flora of Virginia, which was published exactly 250 years before our new version, and celebrated that we had produced a new flora. And it weighs in at 6.388 pounds, which may not be very practical as a field guide. Then we have things like the Flora of North America, which in 30 volumes obviously isn't feasible in the field. And also, because of its very broad scope, means that if you're keying a penstemon, you have 238 choices and a very daunting key to get through in order to key a penstemon species. So I think what many of us really want is Spock's tricorder. Nobody's quite come up with that yet, but I think we can make some steps in that direction. And so we're working at producing a new generation of floras and apps and field guides to facilitate the understanding of the flora. And in order to do that, we've created a database management system, custom designed, called Flora Manager. It's currently version 4.35. And this may give you a little bit of a feel for the for its structure, but I will take pity on you and give you a slightly less complex version of the data diagram, where we can deal with a taxon, images of it, the name and author and synonyms, changing taxonomy. Over here, references on which that is based, We can develop trait tables of whether it's an annual, perennial, or woody plant, and whether the flowers are blue or red or pink. We can develop keys and edit those easily and simply in the system. We can also map it and map whether it's native, exotic, or uncertain, whether it's common or rare or a waif. We can develop these maps based on geographic units like states and sections of states, or on EPA ecoregions, whether it's endemic or not. We can also develop data that includes metrics, coefficients of conservatism, wetland indication, and user custom fields for a specific park or state or location or managed area, etc. So this structure gives us great flexibility. We can then basically produce out of this database product in all sorts of different custom forms, flexible forms for custom areas with custom information. So just to give you a little bit feel for what the Flora Manager tool looks like, this is kind of the entry screen that has the different buttons that lead you to the data of different sorts. Here's the screen for Magnolia macrophylla. And so data gets entered in here, and then it can be flexibly output from this source. This includes the taxonomy section, where it's crosswalked with a sophisticated system of equals or less than. Is this a lump or a split? Is it a different name that is, however, exactly equal in concept to the name being used in the flora, and what the sources are, so we can have flexibility about the taxonomic system that's used and connect to different taxonomic systems than the one that we are developing ourselves. It has identification notes, phenology, distribution, habitats, taxonomy comments, and then the key. The geographic information is developed on this screen. For states and units of states, there's a different screen for the ecoregions. And the key is developed here, where one can insert leads, edit the key, etc., delete leads, change the structure of the key, and so forth. So all this has led us to the flora of the southeastern U.S., which it covers over 10,000 species, almost 2,000 pages long now. We make this freely available for download in a variety of forms. The full Southeast regional flora, 5 kind of physiographically based regions, and also 22 states or portions of states. And the flora has been downloaded. I think the number is actually over 6,000 times now over the last year and a half from a variety of locations. Here's a heat map showing where the downloads are coming from, mostly from the Southeast, but from other places as well. So here is the link to the source for downloading the flora, and one can select the full region, subregions, or individual state floras, and download the flora. So the flora looks sort of like this. Here is the lycophyte genus Huperzia, or a portion of it, with references and information about the genus, identification notes for the genus, a key to the species, then a individual species account with habitat and distribution and phenology, also ID notes for the species, and the synonym showing the different names that have been applied to it and whether they are equal or a lump or a split, and a map showing the abundance of the species in different units throughout, as well as the degree to which that it occurs outside of the region, and what places outside of the region it occurs in. So with the ability to generate custom floras out of this, we also have been working on a series of derivative and collaborative projects. And I've listed just a few of them here. The Flora of Virginia, the Flora of Delaware, funded by the Mount Cuba Center, a guide to the Flora of Arkansas that we're working with folks in Arkansas at universities there, as well as at the Natural Heritage Commission. A new Flora of Georgia, an ecological flora of Florida, and we've also been increasingly producing custom florulettes or florulas for individual managed units for the National Park Service. So an example of that would be the flora of the Little River Canyon National Preserve, which we'll be delivering in the next month to the CUPN network of the National Park Service through a CESU agreement. And this will include photographs as well as keys and the descriptions. And here you can see some of the customized fields that show coefficients of conservatism, show the Park Service units within the CUPN network on which the species occurs. And then photographs, of course, making the flora easier to use for less sophisticated users. I didn't go into this, but I just want to mention briefly that when we create a custom flora that is a subset of the overall southeastern flora, the keys automatically subset to the taxa that are included in that flora. So for Magnolia of Texas, you get a key to 3 species. It works perfectly fine. If you produce a flora for the DC, Maryland, and Virginia states, it's a key to 6 species. You'll see that some of the leads are the same, but some leads differ. Basically, it just subsets the key to the set of species that are needed for that particular list of species that are in a flora. A number of years ago, we developed the Flora of Virginia app. This was done by the Flora of Virginia Foundation. And we introduced a couple of new features within that app. One of those is, I'm going to jump ahead to the graphic key. And the graphic key is a different means of identifying plants rather than using a dichotomous key involving a lot of specialized terminology. You basically select, it's kind of a polyclave or multiple access key in which you select information that you can see or perceive about the plant that you're trying to identify. And each time you select a different attribute for the species, it subsets the list. So this is basically based on that trait database for the flora. So Virginia at the time, this version of the Flora of Virginia had 3,164 species. So before you start, there are 3,164 possibilities. On the right here, once you tap that you have a broadleaved woody plant, you're down to 474. As you tap additional things like your location within the state of Virginia, whether it's in flower or not, whether it's in a light or shady habitat, its growth form, etc. You opposite leaves, simple leaves, palmately lobed, and toothed, you're down to 10 species. And then you can click show, and it will show you that you're down to a variety of species of Acer and Viburnum. You can then click on the thumbnails and try to figure out which of the 10 it is. Though in the new app that we're developing, you will be able to click on a custom key that will be developed for that set of species that will give you a decision tree to enable you to get from the 10 that you are left with to a decision. Once you've come up with something you think you probably have, there are photographs, a variety of photographs of different diagnostic features, additional information about it, and in the Flora of Virginia key, the county distribution and so forth, as well as breadcrumbs, showing how you got there. I'm going to, in order to make sure I have enough time, I'm going to skip quickly through the wildflowers of the Atlantic Southeast. But essentially, we feel that we need to put the hay where the horses can get it. And some people are going to use a Flora, and some people are going to use an app, and some people are only ever going to use a wildflower guide or something like that they can carry with them. And we want to reach all of those people. So we tried to create a somewhat more sophisticated wildflower guide that would enable, and this is part of a series being done by Timber Press, that would enable the relatively unsophisticated user to identify a plant. And we also have a sort of curing plant blindness goal here of getting them introduced into the idea that plants occur in specific habitats, that you can explore for wildflowers on roadsides as well as in state parks or county parks, that there are resources for learning more, that a glossary will help you ID things. And so this sort of works like the graphic key in that you can choose relatively simple features and get down to just a few species that are a likely possibility. So hepatica can be identified by knowing that it's a blue flower. The flowers are radial with 7 to many petals. The leaves are deeply divided basal with entire segments, and that leads you to just a few possibilities of what it might be. But what I want to finish up with is talking a little bit more about Flora Tools for the professional. The ability, this new approach to managing a flora as a database that we can produce flexible output forms from enables us to consider including in Flora kinds of information that have traditionally not been put in them. It also takes us more away from floras produced by academics sitting in herbaria for other academics sitting in herbaria to floras produced for use out in the real world, for use in the field by a diversity of users with different levels of training and also with different purposes for using the flora. So we can attribute species with traits. We can include in the flora things like GRanks and SRanks, knowing that those change through time, but that the product will also be changing through time. With wetland status, environmental consultants always want to know whether it's FAC wet or FAC up. Coefficients of conservatism for the species for doing Floristic Quality Index analysis is another feature that a lot of people have mentioned wanting. Invasiveness status. Obviously, a lot of these features also vary across geography, but with the database, we can tie those features to a specific geography so that if you're using the flora in Georgia, you're going to get the coefficient of conservatism for the species in Georgia and its wetland status in the Southeastern United States. And I want to talk a little bit about a kind of new thing that we have started developing, and that is sun lovingness ratings, heliophily ratings, or grasslandiness, as I sort of jokingly call it, but maybe we'll end up calling it that anyway. And I already made the point a couple of times that as we look at the flora of the Southeast, it's really striking that for what is often considered a forested region of the country, that a lot of the diversity is associated with grasslands. So the Forgotten Grasslands of the South, Reed Noss wrote this book about a decade ago, and we can look at all of these different grassland types in the South that support a tremendous amount of the Southeastern biodiversity. As the late E.O. Wilson wrote in the introduction, the southern grassland biome, when it is properly defined to include the longleaf pine savanna and its intermittent hardwood bottomlands, is probably the richest terrestrial biome in all of North America, to understand, cherish, and preserve the great natural heritage of the southern grassland biome should be a priority goal in America's environmental movement. So when we look at southeastern diversity, we see, like, for instance, the 440 rare species of Tennessee, 60% of them are associated with open habitats, grassland kinds of habitats. When we look at the 62 federally listed species present in Tennessee, 87% are associated with open wetland or open upland habitats and all. So the largest category of rare plant community types, 49% grasslands. So mercy, mercy me, things ain't what they used to be. What has happened to the grasslands of the Southeast? Well, fire suppression across the region, and as well as, of course, conversion of a large proportion of the land to intensive human uses means that that grasslands have suffered, and suffered disproportionately relative to other habitat types in general. And I'll go quickly through North Carolina's grasslands all across the state, and all. So a fire suppressed natural pine oak stand, when we do restoration on it and restore the open sunny kinds of conditions, we have much greater diversity. Here on the left, a southeastern quote forest, but open back up with fire and maybe silvicultural restoration. We have much greater diversity of herbaceous species. We favor many of the rare plant and animal species of the region by restoring these kinds of conditions in these habitats. So as a tool to help with this restoration, and with support from the National Park Service, the regional office, Mark Frey and others, we are developing a grassland fidelity index, or grasslandiness index, where species that grow only in shaded habitats will have a low ranking. Species that require open sunny conditions have a high ranking, and so forth. And we feel that in combination with other indices like the Floristic Quality Index, this will be a powerful tool to guide restoration work. We could, a land manager might use the combination of Floristic Quality Index and Grasslandiness Index to drive a particular stand towards higher floristic quality, but also higher grasslandiness, and restore the natural community that was present on that site. So what does the future hold? We'll be developing many additional resources, and we've put together, in order to do that, a kind of dream team to work on Flora's apps and a website for the full region and state by state. I've listed some of our personnel. We'll be reaching out to photographers across the region. We currently have about 35,000 photographs of southeastern plants. We hope to build that out to about 100,000 and be able to have a rich photographic resource associated with the 10,000 species of the region. And we're working with other collaborators across the region. So the apps that we'll be releasing will have 3 ID methods: traditional dichotomous keys, graphic or polyclave key, and interlinked with the artificial intelligence approach of iNaturalist, which works well for some taxa but not others. It'll contain traditional information like habitats, map distribution maps, native, non-native status, taxonomic discussion, but also less traditional information such as the various ratings and values for wetland, grassland, invasive, GRanks and SRanks, detailed crosswalk to other floras in the region, and taxonomic literature to enable the user to go deeper. And we are doing all of this with funding and collaborations with NatureServe and the heritage programs, the National Park Service, and hopefully other federal agencies, Mount Cuba Center and Flora of Virginia Foundation, so private foundations, the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative, state governments that are funding work specifically for those individual states, and with private funding from a private conservation philanthropist and other UNC herbarium donors. We look forward to additional collaborations, and I'm happy to talk to any of you all who would like to pursue that. And I'll close with a favorite quote. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. I think building this this new system of providing botanical information to users, a broad and diverse set of users, has to be a critical component of how we move forward in conservation into the future. Thanks, and I'm sorry, I guess I'm about out of time, but maybe we'll be able to take a few questions. Thank you for your attention.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was fabulous. I'm echoing. Am I echoing to other folks too? Okay, good. So thank you. That was riveting, and I'm sure it looks like you were ready to talk with us for a whole lot longer. And I'd like to go ahead and open the floor to questions. I'll check the chat in a moment as well. And I think we'll try to just do it. If you'd like to just speak up, that's fine. If it becomes a cacophony, then we'll do like the raise hand feature. So let me send it to the floor and see if there are any questions. Feel free to speak up.
So Alan, this is Peggy. Thanks for a brilliant presentation. Sorry, I'm a little hoarse, but are you, so the tools that you're developing, can they be used in a different region? And would you be willing to work on something beyond the Southeast?
Peggy, that is a big question, and all. I guess what I would say is I feel like I and some of the folks I'm working with in the team at UNC, we are going to have our hands pretty full building this out for the Southeast region and almost half of the flora of North America. Some of the tools that we've developed, for instance, the structure of the Flora Manager and so forth, you know, certainly could be used more broadly, but would of course require populating the information. You know, if you were going to use it in the Pacific Northwest, some of the information would already be populated, but a lot of the information would not. So it would require populating that information. So a lot of the content
template would be usable, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't say this quite explicitly, but I think the day of writing on a word processor a flora that will be published and become increasingly out of date until it's revised 20 or 30 or 50 years later. Why should we do that in 2022?
Yeah. Okay, thanks. You've given me some stuff to think about. This was brilliant. Thank you.
We had a hand up for a moment, and I'm not sure if the person got kicked off or had to leave. So I'll just add, oh, there you are. Go ahead, John.
Yes, thank you, Alan. That was an amazing presentation. I was wondering if you could just explore a little further. Why do grasslands and other sunny environments have higher species totals? Yeah.
Sure.
Higher.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with species packing. That grasslands with the greater amount of sun and so forth can pack species in a lot tighter with narrower leaves that are able to photosynthesize adequately. A lot of grassland systems also have disturbance regimes that tend to prevent one species from kind of becoming the bully, and over time, outcompeting the other species. So fire or other disturbance like scour tends to sort of level the playing field and prevent one species or a few species from grabbing all the resources. That one species gets knocked back. That's partly why with fire regimes we promote a variable fire regime. A once a year fire regime might favor a species that likes a once a year fire regime, but if you're mixing it up with fire once a year versus fire once every 5 years and 3 years and an occasional longer wait, you sort of favor the full mix of species and maintain the highest diversity.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any interactions with evolutionary processes there then? Yeah, like
well, there are also, of course, with grasslands, there is a coevolution with grazing animals and so forth, which operate then as an additional disturbance regime that also makes the kind of maintenance through time of the system more complex, and basically complexity leads to diversity.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Okay, 2 more hands just went up. Let me start with Sylvia, please. I could try to unmute you if that would help. Okay. Let's see. Oh, no, I can't unmute you. Whoops. Oops. I just denied someone entry into the meeting by accident. Sorry. Sylvia, can you unmute yourself? And if not, while we're trying to figure that out, if we could go to Shannon, please.
I just had a specific question about your Flora app. I tried to look for it, and I have an Android device, and I didn't find it. And then I checked, and it seems to only be available for Apple devices.
Yeah, the FloraQuest app that we put out a few years ago was put out only on iOS. The new apps that we'll be rolling out over the next couple of years will be on iOS and Android. Unfortunately, we ran out of funding that we had for the FloraQuest app and weren't able to port that over to Android. But the new apps that will be rolling out across the next couple of years are going to cover the 25 states of the Southeast. They'll all be available on both Android and iOS.
Thanks, that'll be great.
Great, and Mincy, and then Sylvia, I'll look in the chat for your question.
Hi, Alan. This is Mincy. That was a great presentation. My question regards the 30 by 30 worldwide initiative, the initiative to conserve 30% of the planet in the next 30 years. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on encouraging land acquisition and conservation easements in the Southeast where it's needed, acknowledging that we have a lot of challenges with private property and land value. But in my opinion, money should be spent where it needs to be spent in terms of biodiversity, as opposed to just buying a lot of acreage to meet the 30 by 30 goal. Wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, sure. And I think, Mincy, you and I are probably pretty aligned on that. We need more money for land acquisition and bringing more land into public conservation status in many individual states. There are programs, but they're often more limited than we would like them to be. I think we also, I think we just have to go on sort of all fronts. And so that also means working with private landowners, sometimes that then turns in the long run to more long-term conservation and all. You know, I guess I'm naive enough to still think that that as our conservation problems become more and more apparent, that potentially there will be more resources put forward in that direction from both the private sector and from governmental sources. But you know, we do have to target the conservation funding that we have as effectively as we can. And I hope that you know, the kind of information and tools that we're developing help us do that. We can't conserve biodiversity that we don't know exists. We can't conserve biodiversity in places that we don't know that there's biodiversity there. So the important work of the natural heritage programs and the important work, hopefully, of engaging citizen scientists and just private individual landowners with knowing about the biodiversity on their property and caring about conserving it has to be part of the picture as well.
Thank you.
Great. So this is Patricia. Let me pause for a moment, and I'm going to turn to the chat to read Sylvia's question. I'm also going to just inform folks we're digging into the next section of our meeting a little bit, which is fine. But if folks do have announcements to provide during the Native Plants Roundtable, wet your whistles so that you can get ready to shoot them off to us right after we finish with these last two questions. I'm going to read Sylvia's first, and that is, what do you think of plant identification apps such as iPlant and iNaturalist that use crowdsourcing and AI? Do you think they are accurate / useful?
Yeah, so I use iNaturalist a lot myself, and I think it's good, and I think it's only going to get better as more and more observations are made. But it's far from perfect, and particularly with plants that have small technical characters that aren't caught well in photographs and so forth. So graminoids, grasses and sedges and so forth are maybe never going to work very well in these apps. But I do think that they are a good, I'll use the term gateway drug to other plant ID. They get people interested. They get immediate gratification of getting identifications, which are often good. The apps work a lot better than I ever thought they would. I have a grad student right now who is interested in artificial intelligence and machine learning and making those apps better. So I guess that goes again into my philosophy of we need to do everything we can on multiple fronts to try to engage the public, with knowledge about and caring about biodiversity.
Fabulous, thank you. And one public safety announcement would be just beware of location data in those apps and rare species.
Right.
So let me turn now to, I believe it's Hannah who has her hand up.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And thank you for that wonderful presentation and updates on all your projects. I just wanted to ask, since you invited in one of your last slides for the possibility of additional collaborations, at this stage for the derivative projects and upcoming future projects, what sort of data, information, and or manpower would be most useful at this stage from state and local botanists?
That's a great question. Yeah, so we're working on finishing out all of the dichotomous keys. We're pretty far along with that. We do need a lot of photographs, and we're going to be reaching out for photographs. But I would say one of the main things that we need from folks out around the region is their sort of detailed information about habitats and identification hints and so forth that they have in their area. You know, the broad regional flora, we can develop habitat information sort of broadly, but sometimes in particular states, the habitat may be a lot more finely honed. You know, something that occurs in multiple habitats across the region may only occur in much more limited habitats in Arkansas. So we've developed some collaborations with folks out in most of the states of the region to try to fill in that data, but we would like to do more of that. And I guess I'll just say in general about the collaborations. You know, the diversity of funding sources we have and at sort of all different levels really helps us provide great product for everybody, because essentially what we get funded to do for a particular national park unit benefits broadly the area around it, and the funding that we get to develop a Flora of Delaware benefits all of the states near Delaware and so forth. And so it's kind of the many hands makes light work thing that not a lot of funding for a particular project multiplied out across multiple projects across the region means that you know, everybody gets a lot of benefit for not very much money that they put in. I'll just put that out there as a further encouragement for some of the agencies to be involved with the project.
Fabulous. Thank you. And now I do see, I think, what are just legacy hands of Mincy and Hannah's is still up, which is fine. I just want to make sure we have one more thought in the chat. Let's see what that is real quick. INAT does automatically obscure coordinates. Yeah, they're working on that for sure. I think there was just an incident this past summer that actually exposed that. So maybe they've gotten better at that in just that short time, obscuring.
INAT has been working on that problem. I don't think it's perfectly solved yet, and you know, I am cautious about myself about making observations of rare species and putting them on INAT. So, well, thank you, and I am sorry to have eaten a little bit into your agenda time. So sorry I went a little bit long on that, but I hope everyone found it interesting, and I'll be happy to interact with folks, you know, after this meeting via email, etc. If people have additional questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
That's great. And actually, as we segue into the next segment, which is like I said, it's to just share information on native plant activities, events, issues, information that folks might be aware of. I'll just mention an idea which is in our program, which does a lot of conservation work overseas. They actually developed a Train the Trainers program, and with the idea that one team can't do everything, but that team has the experience that could train others to do that. And so something to think about. And, you know, I know that you guys are all busy and with your Southeastern work, but that's certainly a way to sort of spread that around so other folks can actually benefit and learn those systems. Okay, so thank you so much. And for everybody's information, we'll have the recording up on the website. Hopefully, let's give ourselves 2 weeks, and a link to the presentation and any other materials coming out of this meeting. As we move into this next phase, I wanted to first ask if anybody on the line has an update they'd like to share about any native plant work that they're aware of. back to the participant list.
Yeah, hi, Patricia, this is Adrian. We have 3 new materials just got an official release, and these are for selected natural track. So that's good news. 1 bottlebrush squirrel tail, some species Elamoides, and 2 Indian rice grasses. And we'll be sharing the finalized release notices out next week. But growers will be able to get some seed from the Upper Colorado Environmental Plant Material Center, and we sent it out for increase into the BLM seed IDIQ a couple of years ago. So we're getting some inquiries from other folks who are interested in getting that, and we'll find out soon when those new types of native seed sources will be showing up in the BLM seed warehouse.
Great. And I don't know if you would mind sending the species to Maggie or I so we can just capture that in the notes.
Sure.
Thanks. I do have an update from the Fish and Wildlife Service while people are getting their updates ready. I just want to mention that there's been a lot of work going on in the agency to deal with some of the new priorities on landscape scale conservation. And so it was December. In December, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service signed a charter with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies to develop a new landscape conservation task force. Maggie has a couple of links to the press release and some more information on the task force. It's thought that this task force will help us coordinate as an agency across the states on activities like Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which was passed in 2018, and the America the Beautiful initiative. We're going to throw some of those links online too, and I think I'm going to move on. Hopefully, if you want to know more about those, check out those links and circle back with us if there's anything you don't understand. I did want to mention, but I think we lost her from this call, but I wanted to mention that the Southeast Plant Conservation Alliance just launched their first sort of regional meeting. Oh, wait, I see Carrie. Are you here?
Hey, Patricia, I'm here. Thank you so much. Hi, this is Carrie Radcliffe. I am with the Southeastern Plant Conservation Alliance based out of Atlanta Botanical Garden. And we are launching the development of the nation's first regional species of greatest conservation needs list for plants. We're very excited about this and are collaborating with NatureServe and the Natural Heritage Network, the Southeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and Terwilliger Consulting as formal funded project partners. And we'll be engaging various working groups made up of other experts and partners, of which there are many. So we just had our introductory project overview call during our regular virtual bi-monthly meeting time on Monday. That recording and other information will be posted by the end of the week on our website, as well as the schedule and project timeline, which will be composed of multiple meetings and surveys. It's very exciting, so I'm happy to report that, and thank you for remembering. So there are actually RSGCN lists for animal species in 3 regions, multiple iterations of some of those. So this will be the first one for plants. I heard that the Northeast is going to start pursuing developing their own for plants, which is great. And this is a good chance to promote and facilitate the inclusion of plant species in state wildlife action plans and other conservation planning efforts, and just trying to get more and more plants aligned and integrated with broader efforts to conserve wildlife. So let me know if you have questions. Check out se-pca.org, and we'd love to have anyone that is interested. Thank you.
Great, and we posted that in the chat, I think. Yes, and I also posted, I hope it's not wrong, but I did post the list of states that are involved in the Southeast PCA, and I think that is what's really exciting about that is the fact that you are some of your biggest partners in this, or tighter partners in this, include the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And so I think that's going to be very important to raise the visibility of plants through those state agencies that do tend to focus on animals. So I'm going to turn to adjourning the meeting soon here and sort of like closing remarks, but I'm happy to let anybody else mention publications, websites, anything they feel like is important for native plants. Go ahead, Wes.
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to plug two things. First, Alan, great talk. I'm Wes Knapp, Chief Botanist at NatureServe, if you don't know me. Alan was co-author on a paper with me and Reed Noss and a bunch of other people that just got published in December in Conservation Biology, which is Improving Species Status Assessments under the U.S. Endangered Species Act and Implications for Multi-Species Conservation Challenges Worldwide. That's a mouthful, but I'll put a link in the chat. And then lastly, NatureServe's Biodiversity Without Boundaries meeting, BWB, will be in Pittsburgh in March. I believe that is March 22nd through 24th. There is a hybrid option, but if you want to submit a presentation, the deadline is 9 days from now, January 21st, and you must be in person to present, at least at this time. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Wes. And we might circle back with you on that too, but if you put some links in the chat, that'll be good. Great info. Anyone else? Okay, Andrea. Sorry, I didn't see you.
That's all right. This is Andrea Williams. I'm with the California Native Plant Society. I wanted to thank the presenter donor for the talk, but also let folks know that we're going to be working on our 2021 Fire Followers campaign, and I'll put a link in the chat, but that does document some of the plant response to wildfires in California. So I think it'd be of interest to a lot of people.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let me I'd like to close the meeting today just by reminding everybody that we do have listservs that focus on different topics concerning native plant issues like alien plants, medicinal plants, whatnot. And I encourage you to check those out and consider joining those lists for two reasons. One is we provide our announcements for the PCA meetings over those lists. And the other reason is, the other reason I encourage you to subscribe to as many as you are interested in is that we actually don't cross-post because they're focal. The focal issues of each list sort of guides what we post to that list. So the only time we really tend to post across all lists is when we find good job opportunities, funding opportunities, and to announce our PCA meetings. So those should be the only duplicates you ever get. I'd also encourage you to check out, and Maggie, I don't know if you can scroll down to the meetings page section for our future PCA meetings that are, well, they're listed on our website. There we go. And I'm going to post that link too. And so we encourage you, as Gary said, to mark off your second Wednesday every other month to join us for our future meetings. I want to thank again the Planning Committee. Of course, special thanks to Alan for such a great presentation. And thank you all for attending today, and we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.